Hey, today I will explain Battle of Tours. But before that, let me know when and where are you watching this from. Now, let's start. The story begins not on a battlefield, but on a quiet road stretching across North Africa, where dust hangs in the air and the sun burns without mercy. In the early 8th century, a powerful force is moving westward, step by step, city by city. This force is the Umayyad Caliphate, an empire driven by faith, ambition, and momentum. In just a few decades, Muslim armies have burst out of the Arabian Peninsula and reshaped the known world. They have taken Syria, Egypt, Persia, and much of North Africa. To many watching from afar, it feels unstoppable, like a tide that keeps rising no matter what stands in its way. By the year 711, this tide reaches the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. Across a narrow strip of water lies a new land, unfamiliar but tempting. The Visigothic kingdom of Hispania, modern-day Spain, is divided, weak, and struggling with internal conflict. When Muslim forces cross the sea and land on its shores, they move with speed and confidence. Cities fall quickly. Armies scatter. Within just a few years, most of Iberia is under Muslim control. The victors call this land Al-Andalus, and it soon becomes one of the most vibrant regions of the Islamic world. But conquest does not stop simply because land runs out. Beyond the mountains to the north lies another world, colder, forested, and fractured. This is the land of the Franks. Unlike the great empires of the East, Western Europe at this time is a patchwork of small kingdoms, local lords, and fading Roman traditions. Roads crumble, cities shrink, literacy is rare. To many outside observers, this region seems poor, backward, and barely worth the effort. Yet it holds something important. It holds space. It holds potential. And for an expanding empire, space matters. As Muslim governors in Al-Andalus consolidate their power, raids begin across the Pyrenees Mountains into what is now southern France. These early attacks are not full invasions, but fast-moving expeditions. They test defenses. They gather loot. They probe for weakness. Towns are burned. Churches are stripped of gold. Monasteries, often rich and poorly defended, become easy targets. For the people living there, these raids feel sudden and terrifying, appearing out of the mist and disappearing just as quickly. At the center of this growing push north is a man named Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. He is not just a warrior, but a seasoned commander and governor of Al-Andalus. He understands both politics and warfare. He knows how to control diverse armies made up of Arabs and Berbers, men from different lands and cultures, united under one banner. Abd al-Rahman is ambitious, but also cautious. He wants victory, not chaos. Under his leadership, raids turn into something larger, something more deliberate. Meanwhile, far to the north, another figure is quietly rising to power. His name is Charles, later called Martel, meaning the hammer. At this moment, he is not a king. He holds the title of mayor of the palace, a position that sounds humble, but carries real authority. The Frankish kings are weak, little more than symbols. Charles is the one who commands armies, collects taxes, and enforces order. He has spent years fighting rivals, crushing rebellions, and building a hardened core of warriors loyal to him alone. Charles Martel understands violence. He understands that power is not given, it is taken and held by force. He has reorganized the Frankish military, relying heavily on heavily armed infantry rather than flashy cavalry. His men trained to stand their ground, shields locked, spears forward, unmoving. They are farmers and landholders called to fight not for glory, but for survival. Charles does not yet know exactly what is coming from the south, but he knows one thing for certain. If the raids continue, if they grow larger, they will eventually threaten the heart of his territory. By the late 720s, the situation becomes more serious. Muslim forces push deeper into Gaul. The city of Bordeaux falls after a brutal fight. The Duke of Aquitaine, Eudes, tries to resist on his own and fails. His army is shattered. Refugees flee north, carrying stories of burning towns and unstoppable soldiers. Fear spreads faster than any army. The threat is no longer distant. It is moving closer, step by step. Abd al-Rahman now prepares a massive expedition. This is not a simple raid. It is a full-scale campaign, one of the largest ever launched into Western Europe by Muslim forces. Tens of thousands of men march north, carrying weapons, supplies, and the confidence of decades of victory. They cross rivers, forests, and old Roman roads, heading toward the rich lands beyond. Some believe the goal is conquest. Others think it is plunder. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Empires often discover their limits only by pushing past them. Charles Martel watches all of this with cold focus. He does not rush south in panic. He waits. He gathers his forces carefully, calling men from across his lands. He chooses his ground with care, understanding that terrain can decide a battle before the first blow is struck. Somewhere between the cities of Tours and Poitiers, two worlds are moving toward each other, unaware that their collision will echo through history. As autumn approaches, the air grows colder. Leaves fall. The days shorten. Armies march through unfamiliar land, sensing that something decisive is coming. Neither side fully understands what is at stake, but both feel the weight of the moment. Ahead lies a confrontation that will test faith, discipline, and endurance. And as these forces draw closer, the quiet fields of central France are about to become the stage for one of the most debated battles in history, a clash that will soon demand a choice that cannot be undone. The march north continues under a sky that feels heavier. With every passing day, Abd al-Rahman's army moves like a living river, winding through valleys and forests that have not seen such numbers in generations. The soldiers come from many places. Some are Arabs whose families once rode out of the deserts of Arabia. Others are Berbers from the mountains of North Africa, hardened by years of warfare and difficult terrain. They march together, bound by command, faith, and the promise of victory. Their banners ripple in the cold wind, dark shapes against the pale autumn sky. This land is different from Al-Andalus. The roads are rough, often nothing more than dirt tracks cutting through thick woods. Villages are small, scattered, and poor compared to the cities of the south. Yet even here, wealth can be found. Monasteries stand isolated, filled with treasures accumulated over centuries. Gold chalices, jeweled crosses, sacred books written by hand. For many soldiers, these places represent both material reward and symbols of a foreign faith. Each raid feeds the army's confidence. Each burning village reinforces the belief that no one strong enough stands in their path. Abd al-Rahman knows confidence can be dangerous. He keeps his commanders close, reminding them that this land is unfamiliar and the enemy elusive. Scouts are sent ahead. Patrols move along the flanks. Still, discipline is harder to maintain the deeper they go. Soldiers spread out in search of loot. The army stretches long and wide, powerful but less focused than it should be. Victories in the past have taught them that resistance in these lands is weak, that enemies break quickly. Few expect a battle that will truly test them. To the north, Charles Martel prepares in silence. He does not announce his plans. He does not rush to meet the invaders head-on. Instead, he allows them to move deeper, farther from their bases, farther from easy retreat. Messengers travel across Frankish lands, calling men to arms. These are not professional soldiers in the modern sense. They are farmers, landowners, men who know the weight of a plow as well as the weight of a shield. They arrive carrying spears, axes, and round shields, dressed in thick wool and leather against the cold. Charles chooses a place that favors his style of warfare, a gentle rise in the land, bordered by woods, with limited space for cavalry to maneuver. Here, his infantry can stand firm. Here, speed and surprise will matter less than discipline and endurance. He orders his men to dig in, to clear fields of fire, to prepare for a fight that will likely come to them. Days pass. The Frankish army waits, silent, hidden among trees and hills. The contrast between the two forces could not be sharper. Abd al-Rahman's army is used to movement, to swift advances and sudden strikes. Charles's men are built to endure, to hold ground no matter the cost. One side believes momentum wins wars. The other believes patience does. Neither fully understands the other yet. both feel tension tightening like a drawn bow. When Abd al-Rahman finally learns that a large Frankish force stands ahead, he pauses. This is not expected. Past enemies have avoided direct confrontation. Some have fled. Others have surrendered. A pitched battle here, so far north, is unusual. He gathers his commanders and considers his options. Turning back with heavy loot would not be a defeat, but it would leave the threat unresolved. Pressing forward risks a serious clash, but victory could open the way even deeper into Frankish lands. He decides to advance. The two armies now exist within the same region, separated by only a few miles. They do not rush toward each other. Instead, they wait. Days stretch into a tense standoff. Scouts watch from the edges of forests. Fires glow at night, small points of light in the darkness. Soldiers on both sides feel the cold seep into their bones. Horses snort and stamp the ground. Men whisper prayers, some to Allah, others to Christ, each convinced that divine favor rests with them. During this pause, small skirmishes break out. Patrols clash briefly, then withdraw. Each side tests the other, searching for weakness. The Franks discover that the southern army is larger than expected, filled with experienced fighters. The Muslims discover that the Franks do not break easily, that they stand their ground with stubborn resolve. Respect grows, mixed with unease. Charles Martel uses this time carefully. He forbids reckless attacks. He orders his men to stay close, shields always ready. He understands that fear is his enemy's greatest weapon. If his line breaks, it will not reform. He walks among his soldiers, speaking calmly, reminding them why they stand here. This is not just about land or power. This is about their homes, their families, their way of life. Behind them lies everything they know. In the Muslim camp, discipline begins to strain. The longer they wait, the more restless the soldiers become. Loot weighs down wagons. Supplies grow thinner. The cold is sharper than anything many of them have known. Abd al-Rahman senses that time is no longer on his side. He knows that a decisive action is needed, one way or another. As the sun rises on another gray autumn morning, the air feels charged. Something is about to break. Both armies sense it. The waiting cannot last forever. Soon, shields will clash, spears will thrust, and the quiet fields will echo with the sounds of battle. The moment of decision draws near, and with it comes a test that neither side can avoid. A test that will reveal whether endurance or momentum will shape the future of this land. The morning arrives slowly, as if the world itself is hesitant to witness what is about to unfold. A thin mist clings to the ground, drifting between trees and low hills, softening the outlines of men and weapons. The grass is damp beneath heavy boots. Breath turns visible in the cold air. For days now, the two armies have watched each other from a distance, close enough to feel the tension, far enough to delay the moment of impact. But this morning feels different. There is a stillness that does not belong to peace. It belongs to waiting just before violence. Charles Martel stands among his men, wrapped in a thick cloak. He does not wear a crown. He does not need one. His authority comes from the confidence in his posture, from the fact that every man here knows he has led them through chaos before. He studies the terrain one last time. The slight rise where his infantry is positioned gives them a small advantage. The trees on either side limit wide movement. This is where he wants the enemy to come. This is where his wall of shields will matter most. The Frankish soldiers take their places quietly. There is no shouting, no dramatic display. Shields are lifted, edges overlapping. Spears angle forward, forming a dense forest of iron points. Some men whisper prayers under their breath. Others stare straight ahead, faces tense, jaws clenched. These are not men chasing glory. They are men preparing to endure. They know that once the fighting begins, there will be no easy retreat. Their strength lies in standing together, unmoving like stone. Across the open ground, Abd al-Rahman prepares his army. His camp stirs with movement and sound. Orders are shouted in sharp bursts. Armor is tightened. Horses are led forward, restless and alert. The Muslim army has fought many battles, but this one feels unfamiliar. The enemy is not rushing forward. There are no panicked retreats, no scattered resistance. Instead, there is a solid line waiting, silent and disciplined. Abd al-Rahman rides along his ranks, offering encouragement, reminding his men of past victories. He knows morale matters as much as numbers. He also knows that delay favors no one now. Supplies are limited. The cold drains energy. If there is to be a breakthrough, it must come through action. He plans to use mobility and force to break the Frankish line, trusting in speed, courage, and the shock of attack. As the sun climbs higher, the mist begins to lift. Shapes sharpen. Banners become visible. The distance between the two armies feels suddenly very small. A signal is given. The first movement begins. Muslim cavalry advances cautiously at first, hooves thudding softly against the ground. Archers move forward, loosing arrows that arc through the air. Some strike shields, others find gaps, drawing cries of pain from the Frankish line. But the line does not break. Shields rise higher, tighter. Men shift slightly, covering the wounded, filling spaces without panic. Charles watches closely, eyes scanning for any sign of weakness. Then the attacks grow heavier. Cavalry charges forward in waves, riders urging their horses into speed, weapons raised. The sound is thunderous, a rolling roar of hooves and voices. The Frankish soldiers brace themselves. Impact comes like a collision with a wall. Horses slam into shields. Spears thrust forward. The force of the charge is immense, but the line holds. Men are knocked back, some trampled, some crushed, but the formation remains. Where one falls, another steps in. The shock of this resistance ripples through the attacking force. This is not how battles usually go. The Frankish infantry does not scatter. It does not flee. It absorbs the blow and remains standing. Abd al-Rahman watches with growing concern. He orders more attacks, pressing harder, hoping that repeated pressure will eventually cause the line to crack. Hours pass in brutal rhythm. Charge, clash, withdrawal. The ground becomes churned and slick with mud and blood. Bodies lie where they fell, human and horse alike. The cries of the wounded mix with shouted commands and the clash of steel. The air smells of sweat, iron, and damp earth. Yet still, the Frankish line endures. Charles Martel remains calm, issuing orders only when needed. He understands that his greatest weapon is patience. Every failed charge weakens the enemy. Every moment the line holds drains their strength. His men are tired, arms burning from holding shields, legs stiff from standing so long, but they draw strength from each other. As long as they stand together, they believe they cannot be broken. In the Muslim ranks, frustration begins to spread. The expected breakthrough does not come. Losses mount, horses tire. Men look over their shoulders, wondering how long this can continue. Abd al-Rahman senses the shift. He knows that if momentum is lost, doubt will creep in, and doubt is deadly on a battlefield. Still, he presses on, searching for a decisive moment, a weakness, a single collapse that could turn endurance into panic. Somewhere in the chaos, he believes, the Frankish line must break. The battle is far from decided, but the balance is delicate now, hanging between two opposing truths. That unstoppable force can meet an immovable object, and when it does, the result is never simple. As the day drags on and shadows begin to stretch across the field, both armies feel the strain. The clash has not ended, and neither side has yielded. But something is changing. Beneath the noise and violence, a turning point is approaching. One that will soon pull leaders and soldiers alike into a moment from which there will be no easy return. By the time the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, the battlefield has become a place almost unrecognizable from the quiet fields it once was. The ground is torn apart by countless feet and hooves. Broken weapons lie scattered among fallen men. The air feels heavier now, thick with exhaustion, and the sharp, metallic smell of blood. What began as controlled formations and planned attacks has slowly turned into a grinding test of endurance, where victory no longer seems sudden or glorious, but distant and uncertain. The Frankish line still stands, but it is not untouched. Faces are bruised and streaked with dirt. Arms tremble from hours of holding shields and spears. Men shift their weight, feeling pain in places they did not know could hurt this deeply. Yet, even now, discipline holds them together. They do not chase retreating enemies. They do not break formation to strike wildly. Each man trusts the one beside him, knowing that survival depends on unity. Charles Martel watches the subtle movements of the enemy. He sees the slight hesitation before each new charge, the way riders now approach with less confidence than before. He senses that the rhythm of the battle is changing. This is no longer a swift campaign of conquest for the Southern Army. It is becoming a slow, punishing struggle against an opponent that refuses to collapse. Charles knows this favors him. He also knows that one mistake could still destroy everything. Across the field, Abd al-Rahman feels the weight of command pressing harder with every passing hour. He has committed fully to this battle, and there is no clean way out. Retreat under these conditions would be dangerous, perhaps disastrous. His army is spread wide, burdened with loot, tired from days of marching and fighting. Yet, continuing the assaults without progress risks draining morale completely. He must find a way to break the deadlock. He orders fresh units forward, including elite fighters who have not yet been fully engaged. The attacks grow more focused, more desperate. Cavalry presses closer to the Frankish center, searching for a weak point. Infantry moves in to support, attempting to pull shields apart, to force gaps through sheer strength. The fighting becomes closer, more personal. Men grapple, shove, and strike at arm's length. There is no room for elegant maneuvers here, only raw force and stubborn will. The Franks respond by tightening their formation even further. Shields overlap until there are barely any gaps. Spears are used not just to thrust, but to push back bodies, to keep the enemy from gaining ground. The line bends in places, but does not break. Each moment of survival feeds their belief that they can endure anything thrown at them. As the hours pass, an unexpected problem begins to emerge in the Muslim camp behind the lines. Rumors spread that Frankish forces may be moving toward the baggage train, where the army's loot and supplies are stored. Whether the threat is real or exaggerated hardly matters. The idea alone is enough to cause unease. Many soldiers have fought not just for faith or victory, but for the wealth they have gathered. The thought of losing it creates tension and distraction at the worst possible time. Abd al-Rahman hears these whispers and understands the danger immediately. If parts of his army pull back to protect their spoils, the cohesion of the force could unravel. He rides through his ranks, shouting orders, trying to keep focus on the battle ahead. Discipline, once taken for granted, now requires constant effort to maintain. The Frankish soldiers sense the shift as well. The attacks feel less coordinated. Pressure on certain points eases unexpectedly, then surges again in uneven bursts. Charles Martel does not order a counterattack. He resists the temptation. He knows that leaving the defensive position could expose his men to disaster. Instead, he lets the enemy's confusion work against itself. As darkness begins to creep across the field, both armies slow. Fighting does not stop entirely, but it loses intensity. Men pull back slightly, breathing heavily, nursing wounds, clinging to whatever strength remains. Fires are lit at a distance, casting flickering light across a landscape of devastation. Groans of the wounded echo through the night, unanswered. In the Muslim camp, the mood is uneasy. The day has not brought the victory many expected. Losses are heavier than planned. Supplies are running low. The cold bites harder after sunset, especially for men unused to such weather. Abd al-Rahman gathers his commanders and speaks in low, urgent tones. They discuss options, weighing pride against survival, momentum against reality. In the Frankish camp, silence dominates. There is no celebration, no sense of triumph yet, only relief that the line held for another day. Charles Martel knows the battle is not over. He knows that what happens next could decide everything. As men settle into uneasy rest, weapons close at hand, both sides wait for the dawn, aware that the next light may reveal either victory or catastrophe, and that the fragile balance holding the battle in place cannot last forever. Night settles fully over the battlefield, wrapping the broken land in darkness and cold. The fires burn low on both sides, small islands of light surrounded by shadows. Men lie where they fell, some beyond help, others still breathing, whispering prayers, or calling out names that will never answer. The sounds of battle have faded, but the silence feels heavier than the noise ever did. It is the silence of uncertainty, of men wondering what the morning will bring. In the Frankish camp, rest comes only in fragments. Soldiers sit with their backs against shields, weapons within reach, eyes half closed but alert. The ground is hard and damp. The cold creeps in slowly, stiffening muscles already pushed to their limits. Yet, there is a quiet sense of pride moving through the ranks. They faced repeated assaults and did not break. Many know that history rarely remembers those who simply stand their ground. But tonight, standing firm feels like everything. Charles Martel moves among his men one last time before dawn. He speaks softly, offering reassurance rather than promises. He knows better than to claim victory too early. The enemy is still there. The battle could reignite at any moment, but he also knows that time is now his ally. Every hour that passes weakens the force facing him. He gives simple orders, reminding his commanders to hold position, to stay disciplined, to be ready at first light. Across the field, the mood in the Muslim camp is far more strained. The long day of fighting has shaken expectations. Many soldiers had believed this campaign would would be another swift success, like so many before. Instead, they have met an opponent who refuses to yield. Wounds are tended hastily. Horses are watered and calmed. Supplies are counted, and the numbers are not comforting. Abd al-Rahman sits with his commanders, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He listens as reports come in. Losses are significant. Morale is uneven. The rumors about the baggage train have not died down. Some units are restless, more concerned with protecting their loot than preparing for another full day of fighting. Abd al-Rahman understands the danger clearly now. An army divided by fear and distraction is an army close to collapse. He considers his options carefully. Pressing the attack at dawn carries great risk. The Frankish line has proven stronger than expected. Another day of heavy losses could turn hesitation into panic. Yet retreat is no simple matter either. Turning south with an exhausted army, burdened with supplies and wounded men, could invite pursuit. The wrong decision could destroy everything he has built. As the night deepens, small movements ripple through the Muslim camp. Units quietly reposition. Guards double around the baggage train. Whispers pass from group to group. No single order is announced, but an understanding begins to form. Survival may now matter more than conquest. The confidence that once fueled the advance has been replaced by caution, even doubt. Before dawn, a thin frost settles on the ground. The cold sharpens the air, biting at exposed skin. In the Frankish camp, men stir as the sky begins to lighten. They rise slowly, stiff and sore, lifting shields and spears, preparing themselves for another brutal day. They expect the enemy to come again, perhaps with even greater force. There is tension, but also resolve. If they held yesterday, they believe they can hold again. The sun climbs higher, and visibility improves. Charles Martel scans the field, eyes narrowing. Something feels wrong. Or rather, something feels absent. The usual signs of preparation across the field are missing. There is no movement forming into lines. No cavalry advancing into position. Only stillness. Scouts are sent forward cautiously. They move through the mist, weapons ready, expecting resistance at any moment. But as they approach the enemy camp, they find something unexpected. Tents stand empty. Fires have burned down to ash. The ground is marked with hurried tracks leading south. The Muslim army is gone. The realization spreads quickly through the Frankish ranks, first as disbelief, then as quiet astonishment. Abd al-Rahman has withdrawn under cover of darkness. He has chosen preservation over further risk. The great force that seemed unstoppable only days before has slipped away, leaving behind the battlefield and its dead. Charles Martel does not order a reckless pursuit. He understands the dangers of chasing a retreating army into unfamiliar territory. Instead, he secures the field, ensuring that the withdrawal is real, not a trap. Only when certainty replaces doubt does the weight of the moment truly settle in. This battle, fought without dramatic charges at dawn, or a final sweeping victory, has ended through endurance rather than explosion. The Frankish line did not advance. It simply refused to fall, and in doing so, it forced an empire to turn back. Yet, even as the field grows quiet, the meaning of what has just happened is not fully understood. The echoes of this decision will travel far beyond these fields, shaping how future generations remember this moment. And as word of the withdrawal begins to spread, the story of this battle is only just beginning to take on a life of its own. The battlefield remains silent long after the truth becomes clear. The enemy has gone, but no one celebrates yet. Victory, when it comes without a final clash, feels strange and unreal. The Frankish soldiers stand among the abandoned ground, surrounded by the evidence of struggle left behind. Broken weapons lie half buried in mud. Shields are split. Blood darkens the earth where men stood shoulder to shoulder only hours earlier. Crows already circle above, sensing what humans try not to look at too closely. Charles Martel orders his men to move carefully. There is always the possibility of deception, of an ambush waiting beyond the trees. Scouts fan out again, riding farther this time, confirming what the first reports suggested. The Muslim army is retreating south, moving fast, leaving behind only traces of their passage. No lines are forming. No counterattack is coming. The battle is over. Only then does the weight of it begin to sink in. Men lower their shields and sit down heavily, exhaustion finally taking control. Some laugh quietly, not out of joy, but disbelief. Others stare at the ground, thinking of friends who will not rise again. There are no triumphant shouts, no wild celebration. This was not a clean victory. It was survival, earned through pain, discipline, and restraint. And everyone knows how close it came to going another way. Charles Martel walks the field slowly. He looks at the fallen on both sides, understanding that history will remember the outcome, not the cost. He does not linger too long. A leader who stares too deeply into the aftermath risks losing sight of what comes next. He knows that this moment will shape his future and the future of the lands he protects. But for now, his focus is practical. The dead must be buried rememberfully. The wounded must be cared for. Order must be restored. As the Frankish army secures the area, word begins to spread beyond the battlefield. Messengers ride hard toward towns and strongholds, carrying news that will sound almost unbelievable. The advance from the south has been stopped, not delayed, not paid off, stopped. Villages that had braced themselves for fire and plunder breathe again. Churches ring bells in relief. People who barely understand where Tours or Poitiers lie feel the tension ease from their daily lives. Far to the south, Abd al-Rahman's retreat is tense and disciplined, but heavy with loss. The army moves quickly, avoiding open confrontation, guarding its rear. The decision to withdraw was not cowardice. It was calculation. Abd al-Rahman understood that his advantage had slipped away. The enemy would not break. Supplies were thinning. Morale was fragile. To stay longer risked turning an orderly campaign into a disaster remembered for generations. Yet the retreat carries its own cost. Soldiers feel confusion and frustration. Many struggle to understand how an army that conquered so much land could be forced to turn back by men who did not even chase them. Confidence, once unshakable, now has cracks. Questions arise, quietly at first. Was this land truly worth the effort? Had they reached the edge of what could be taken by force? In Al-Andalus, news of the campaign spreads with less clarity. Stories grow distorted with distance. Some say it was a great battle. Others claim it was simply a raid that achieved its goals and returned safely. The truth sits somewhere in between, uncomfortable and difficult to frame. There was no crushing defeat, but there was no victory either. And for an expanding empire, the absence of victory matters deeply. Back in Frankish lands, Charles Martel's position strengthens overnight. He had already been powerful, but now he is proven. Nobles who once doubted him take notice. Rivals reconsider their ambitions. The idea spreads that Charles is not just a strong leader, but a protector chosen by fate, perhaps even by God. This belief will matter greatly in the years ahead, shaping alliances, loyalty, and future campaigns. Still, Charles himself does not declare the battle as a world-changing moment. He understands how fragile power is. He knows that enemies still exist, that unity among the Franks is never guaranteed. This victory does not end conflict. It buys time. Time to consolidate. Time to prepare. Time to build something stronger from what survived. The fields near Tours and Poitiers slowly return to quiet. Grass will grow again. Roads will be used by merchants and travelers who may never know what almost happened here. But the memory lingers in those who stood in the line. They remember the sound of hooves crashing into shields, the feeling of legs shaking while refusing to move, the long hours where nothing mattered except holding the man beside you. And beyond memory, something else begins to form. Meaning. Chroniclers will later write about this moment, each shaping it to fit their beliefs and fears. Some will describe it as a clash of faiths, a line drawn between worlds. Others will reduce it to a regional conflict, one battle among many. The truth is quieter and more complex. This was not the end of Muslim presence in Europe. It was not the end of Christian vulnerability, but it was a pause, a moment where expansion met resistance and did not pass through, that pause will echo across generations. Because of this stand, the direction of power in Western Europe begins to change. The Franks gain confidence. Their leaders think not just of survival, but of expansion of their own. Charles Martel's family, strengthened by his reputation, will rise even higher. His grandson will one day be crowned emperor, reshaping Europe under a revived idea of empire. None of that is guaranteed yet, but the foundation is quietly laid here, in mud and blood and silence. As winter approaches, both sides turn inward. The Muslim forces focus on securing and governing the lands they already control. The Franks focus on strengthening borders, rebuilding, and preparing for what might come next. The clash at Tours does not end history. It redirects it gently, but firmly, like a river meeting a stone and choosing a new path around it. And as storytellers begin to whisper about the battle, where an advance was stopped without a final blow, the legend slowly grows larger than the reality. What truly happened here will be debated for centuries. But what matters most, for now, is simple. The advance has ended. The line has held. And Europe, still fragile and divided, has been given time to breathe before the next turning of the world. As weeks pass after the retreat, the battlefield fades from daily thought, but its shadow stretches far beyond the quiet fields where it all happened. Life resumes on the surface. Farmers return to their land. Traders move along roads once again. Churches reopen their doors fully, their walls no longer echoing with prayers spoken in fear. Yet beneath this return to normal, something has changed. People may not speak of it openly, but they feel it. A boundary has been tested, and for the first time in years, it has not been pushed back. Charles Martel understands this better than anyone. He knows that a single battle, even one like this, does not secure the future. Armies can return. Alliances can shift. What matters now is what he does with the moment he has been given. He begins moving quickly, not with soldiers, but with strategy. He strengthens his grip over Frankish territories, asserting authority where it was once weak or challenged. Lords who had acted independently are reminded where power truly lies. Those who resist are dealt with firmly, but not recklessly. This is how Charles has always ruled, not through spectacle, but through steady pressure. He rewards loyalty with land and protection. He punishes defiance with precision. The lesson from the battle is clear in his mind. Discipline wins where chaos fails. Unity matters more than speed. He applies this thinking to governance, just as he did to warfare. At the same time, the southern frontier remains under close watch. Scouts are placed along key routes. Fortifications are repaired or rebuilt. The Franks do not expect another massive invasion soon, but they prepare as if it could come at any time. The memory of how close danger came is still fresh. No one wants to be caught unready again. South of the mountains, in Al-Andalus, the retreat forces a quiet reckoning. Abd al-Rahman does not return in triumph. His campaign did not end in disaster, but it did not expand the frontier either. For an empire built on momentum, this matters. Governors and commanders discuss the limits of further expansion northward. The terrain is harsh, the climate unforgiving. The resistance, now proven, is stubborn and organized. This does not mean the Muslim presence in Europe weakens. Al-Andalus continues to grow culturally and economically. Cities thrive, learning flourishes, trade expands, but the focus turns inward rather than outward. Holding what has already been taken becomes more important than reaching farther into unknown lands. Over time, stories of the battle begin to change depending on who tells them. Among the Franks, the event grows in importance with each retelling. What was once a defensive stand becomes a symbol. Monks writing in distant monasteries frame it as divine intervention, a moment when God protected Christendom from destruction. The details sharpen and blur at the same time. Numbers grow larger. The threat becomes darker. Charles Martel's role becomes more heroic, more absolute. He is no longer just a leader who held a line. He becomes a chosen instrument of history. Among Muslim chroniclers, the tone is different. The campaign is recorded, but without drama. It is one expedition among many, notable for its resistance, but not central to the empire's story. The withdrawal is described as strategic, not catastrophic. History moves forward without pausing to dwell on it. This contrast in memory will shape how later generations understand what happened and why. Centuries later, scholars will argue endlessly about the true importance of the battle. Some will say it saved Europe. Others will say its impact was exaggerated, that history would have followed a similar path regardless. But those debates belong to a distant future. For the people living in this moment, the meaning is simpler. A threat was faced. It did not pass through. And that alone feels monumental. Charles Martel's power continues to grow. His reforms strengthen the Frankish military even further. Land is redistributed to support warriors. Loyalty becomes tied to service. The groundwork is laid for something larger than any one battle. A new kind of order begins to form, one that will soon extend far beyond the lands Charles currently controls. But even as his influence expands, Charles remains cautious. He knows how fragile success can be. He has seen how quickly confidence can turn into vulnerability. The fields near Tours taught him that standing still, holding firm, can sometimes change the course of events more than any bold charge forward. And yet, the world does not stop turning. New threats emerge. Old rivals regroup. The South remains powerful and watchful. The North is still divided and unpredictable. The pause created by the battle is just that, a pause. What comes next will depend on choices not yet made, on leaders not yet risen, on forces quietly gathering strength beyond the edges of the known map. As years pass, the clash between these two worlds does not end. It simply changes shape. Borders harden. Cultures influence each other in ways neither side fully understands. Trade, conflict, and ideas cross boundaries, even when armies do not. The line held at Tours is not a wall. It is a moment of resistance in a long, unfolding story. And somewhere in that story, the legacy of endurance continues to grow, not as a single act frozen in time, but as a reminder that history often turns not on grand victories, but on moments when someone refuses to move. Yet, even that refusal creates consequences, because holding a line invites a response, and far beyond the quiet fields where this battle took place, new ambitions are already forming, new leaders watching and learning, waiting for the right moment to test how firm that line truly is. As the years slowly move forward, the Battle of Tours drifts away from living memory and into something quieter, heavier, and more powerful: interpretation. What once was mud, blood, fear, and exhaustion begins to harden into meaning. People who never saw the battlefield start shaping what it represented. And in that shaping, the battle grows larger than the men who fought it. In Frankish lands, monks take up their pens. In cold stone monasteries, lit by flickering candles, they write chronicles meant not just to record events, but to explain them. History, for them, is never neutral. It is a story guided by God's will. And when they look back at the moment when a powerful southern army stopped advancing, they see divine intention written between the lines. To them, this was not merely a military stand. It was protection, a signal that their world, fragile and divided, was not meant to fall. The language they use becomes stronger with each retelling. What had been described as an army becomes a vast host. What had been a disciplined defense becomes a miraculous wall. Charles Martel is no longer just a leader who chose his ground well. He becomes the hammer of God, a man raised up at the exact moment history required him. His patience becomes wisdom. His restraint becomes holiness. His refusal to pursue becomes proof of divine guidance rather than cautious realism. These stories spread slowly, carried by travelers, repeated by priests, absorbed by people who never questioned their shape. For ordinary villagers, the details matter less than the feeling, the fear they once felt when rumors of burning churches came from the south now has a counterweight. They believe they were saved, and belief, once rooted, reshapes identity. At the same time, the world south of the Pyrenees continues to evolve in its own direction, largely untouched by these growing legends. Al-Andalus becomes one of the most advanced regions in Europe. Cities like Cordoba flourish. Scholars study medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Libraries grow. Architecture rises that future generations will admire without fully understanding its origins. Life goes on, rich and complex, far from the fields where the advance paused. For Muslim historians, the campaign north is remembered differently. It is not erased, but it is not glorified either. It is a boundary reached, tested, and left behind. Their focus remains on governance, learning, and internal stability. The frontier becomes something to manage, not push relentlessly. Expansion, once explosive, now breathes and consolidates. This difference in memory creates a widening gap in perception. In the north, the battle grows into a defining moment. In the south, it fades into the background. Neither version is fully false. Neither is fully complete. But over time, it is the northern story that will dominate how the event is remembered in much of the world. Generations later, as new kingdoms rise and fall, the name of Charles Martel continues to gain weight. His family, already powerful, builds upon his legacy. His son strengthens Frankish rule. His grandson, Charlemagne, will one day be crowned emperor, reviving the idea of a unified Christian Europe. When chroniclers look for origins, they trace lines backward, and those lines often lead to Tours. The battle becomes a symbolic beginning, whether it truly deserves that role or not. It is cited as proof that Europe had a destiny, that it was always meant to remain separate, protected, and distinct. This belief influences how future conflicts are understood, justified, and remembered. A single stand becomes a foundation myth. But history, when viewed closely, is never that simple. The Battle of Tours did not end contact between worlds. Trade continued. Ideas crossed borders quietly. Muslim scholars influenced European learning centuries later. Christian pilgrims traveled through lands shaped by Islam. Conflict and cooperation existed side by side, woven together in ways that defy simple narratives of clash and separation. Yet the myth persists because it serves a purpose. It gives shape to fear. It offers a moment of clarity in a messy past. It allows people to believe that history turns on courage alone, rather than on logistics, weather, terrain, and chance. Even the battlefield itself becomes a place of imagination. Travelers pass near it unaware. Farmers plow fields that once held lines of shields. No monument rises immediately to mark the spot. There is no grand structure, no preserved ground, and yet the absence almost strengthens the legend. What cannot be seen becomes easier to reshape. As centuries roll on, scholars begin to question the old stories. They reread sources. They compare accounts. They notice contradictions. They ask uncomfortable questions. Was the army really that large? Was conquest truly the goal? Would Europe have fallen without this battle? The answers are complex, uncertain, and often unsatisfying. But even as historians debate, the emotional power of the story remains. Because people are not drawn to history only for facts, they are drawn to meaning. And the idea that a line was held, that something fragile survived, because ordinary men stood still and refused to move, continues to resonate. In times of later crisis, the memory of Tours is revived again and again. Leaders invoke it. Writers reference it. It becomes shorthand for resistance, for defense, for identity under threat. Each revival adds another layer, another interpretation, another emotional charge. And yet, beneath all of this, the reality remains quietly human. Men were cold. Men were afraid. Men held shields until their arms shook. A commander chose patience over pursuit. Another chose withdrawal over pride. The future shifted not because one side was destined to win, but because on that particular stretch of land, at that particular moment, endurance outweighed momentum. That is the part most often lost in legend. As Europe continues to transform, slowly pulling itself out of fragmentation, the memory of Tours sits like a stone beneath the current. It does not control the flow, but it changes how the water moves around it. It becomes a reference point, a pause in expansion, a reminder that borders are not only drawn by ambition, but by resistance. And still, far beyond the arguments of scholars and the myths of chroniclers, the deeper story continues forward. Because the battle did not end conflict, it did not seal fate forever. It simply delayed, redirected, and reshaped what came next. And what comes next, shaped by power, belief, and legacy, will carry the influence of this moment into a new age, one where the struggle for unity, authority, and identity will grow even larger, and where the echoes of endurance will be tested again in ways no one at Tours could have imagined. As Europe drifts into the centuries that follow, the Battle of Tours settles into the background of daily life, but never truly disappears. It becomes one of those moments people return to when they search for origins, when they ask how the present came to be shaped the way it is. The world changes slowly, then suddenly. Kingdoms rise, fracture, and rise again. Borders shift like sand. Yet the memory of resistance, of a stand that held, quietly informs how power begins to organize itself. In the Frankish realm, the legacy of Charles Martel hardens into structure. The military system he strengthened continues to evolve. Land is tied more closely to service. Warriors become protectors, not just of territory, but of an idea. That order must be defended, even when the enemy seems unstoppable. This way of thinking seeps into governance, into law, into the expectations placed on leaders and subjects alike. Authority becomes something earned through protection. This mindset will shape medieval Europe in deep and lasting ways. Castles rise not only as symbols of power, but as promises of defense. Lords justify their rule by their ability to keep danger at bay. The memory of external threat, sharpened by stories of the Southern advance, makes unity feel necessary even when it is difficult. Fragmentation no longer feels merely inconvenient. It feels dangerous. Yet, while Europe organizes itself around defense and consolidation, the Islamic world continues along a different rhythm. Knowledge flows east and west through vast networks of scholars, traders, and travelers. Science, philosophy, medicine, and art develop with remarkable speed. Al-Andalus becomes a bridge between worlds, a place where ideas cross borders, even when armies do not. This exchange will later feed into Europe's own intellectual awakening, though few will acknowledge the connection at the time. The contrast between these paths feeds misunderstanding. In Europe, the story of Tours reinforces the idea of separation. In the Islamic world, the campaign north remains a minor chapter, overshadowed by greater achievements elsewhere. The two sides remember the same moment in entirely different ways, and that difference deepens the cultural divide. Over time, the battle becomes a symbol pulled into new contexts. During later wars, rulers invoke it as proof that resistance works, that faith and discipline can halt even the strongest enemy. The details no longer matter. What matters is the feeling it carries. Tours becomes a word that suggests survival, endurance, and destiny, even when those using it know little about what actually happened. Scholars, centuries later, will attempt to strip the myth away. They point out that Muslim rule did not vanish from Europe after the battle. That trade continued. That cultural exchange remained constant. That the idea of an unstoppable advance was exaggerated, and they are right. But even careful scholarship cannot erase the emotional power of the story. Once a narrative becomes part of identity, it resists correction. Meanwhile, the landscape itself absorbs the past in silence. The fields where shields locked and cavalry charged grow quiet again. Roads cross them. Seasons pass. Snow falls and melts. Generations are born and die without knowing the ground beneath their feet once held the weight of history. This is how most turning points live on, not as preserved sites, but as invisible foundations. As the medieval world matures, Europe faces new dangers. Vikings raid from the north. Internal conflicts tear kingdoms apart. Famine and plague reshape populations. In these moments of crisis, the memory of Tours offers comfort. It reminds people that survival is possible, that chaos can be endured. Even if the battle itself no longer resembles the legend, the belief it inspires remains useful. The irony is that the real lesson of Tours is often misunderstood. It was not a clash that proved one civilization superior. another. It was a moment where geography, climate, leadership, and discipline aligned just enough to stop momentum. It showed that expansion has limits, and that holding ground can be as powerful as conquering it. As historians continue to debate, the battle's role shifts again. Modern thinkers question older narratives shaped by fear and faith. They ask whether the event truly saved anything, or whether it merely delayed inevitable changes. Some argue that Europe's identity would have formed regardless. Others insist the pause mattered more than we can measure. Perhaps the truth lies between those extremes. The Battle of Tours did not decide the fate of the world in a single blow, but it did alter confidence. It changed expectations. It forced powerful leaders to reconsider assumptions. And in history, those quiet shifts often matter more than dramatic victories. As the centuries roll forward, the echo of that pause continues to shape how people imagine borders, threats, and identity. And as Europe moves toward a new age of kings, empires, and ideas, the shadow of Tours lingers, not as a loud proclamation, but as a reminder that history is often shaped by moments when nothing moves, when a line holds, and when the future waits to see what will happen next. And what happens next, shaped by ambition and memory alike, will push Europe into transformations far greater than any single battle, carrying the influence of endurance into a world that is about to change beyond recognition. Part 9. As Europe drifts deeper into the centuries that follow, the Battle of Tours settles into the soil of memory rather than the noise of daily life. It is no longer spoken of by those who fought it because they are gone. Instead, it lives in stories passed from generation to generation, reshaped by fear, pride, and belief. The world they knew continues to change, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. Kingdoms form and collapse. Borders harden, then blur. Yet the idea that a line once held against a powerful force quietly influences how Europe begins to see itself. In the lands once ruled loosely by the Franks, order becomes a priority. The chaos of constant raids and rival lords feels more dangerous now that people have tasted what organized resistance can achieve. Power begins to concentrate in the hands of those who promise protection. Lords build fortifications not just to display wealth, but to reassure the people living in their shadow. Walls rise. Keep stand firm on hills. The lesson taken from Tours is simple and deeply felt. Survival belongs to those who prepare and stand together. This mindset reshapes leadership. A ruler is no longer judged only by lineage, but by the ability to defend land and people. The memory of the Southern advance, exaggerated or not, remains a warning. It encourages unity in moments when division would have once been accepted. Slowly, painfully, Europe begins to move toward stronger central authority, even if it does not yet know what that authority will look like. Meanwhile, beyond those same borders, the Islamic world continues to flourish. Trade routes stretch from the Atlantic to the edges of Asia. Knowledge flows freely through libraries, schools, and courts. Mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy advance in ways that will one day shape the world. Al-Andalus stands as a beacon of learning, its cities alive with debate and discovery. From the outside, however, much of this is unseen or misunderstood by the northern kingdoms. The result is a growing imbalance in perception. Europe increasingly defines itself through defense and faith. The Islamic world defines itself through governance, learning, and culture. Each side remembers the same century differently, focusing on what mattered most to them. The Battle of Tours, in this contrast, becomes a symbol rather than a shared memory. Over time, the battle is drawn into moments of later conflict. When Europe faces new threats, its leaders look backward for reassurance. They speak of Tours as proof that resistance works, that standing firm can preserve a way of life. The details are rarely questioned. The story serves its purpose. It becomes a banner raised in times of fear, a reminder that the past offers examples of survival. Historians, centuries later, attempt to untangle the truth from the legend. They study weather patterns, supply lines, and political realities. They note that Muslim rule remained in parts of Europe long after Tours. They point out that trade and cultural exchange never truly stopped. They argue that history is shaped by many forces, not one decisive moment. And yet, even as facts become clearer, the emotional weight of the story remains. Because Tours is not remembered for what it was, but for what people needed it to be. The landscape itself holds no opinion. The fields where men once stood shoulder to shoulder continue to change with the seasons. Crops grow, paths shift, travelers pass through unaware. There are no grand monuments marking the exact place where momentum slowed. History does not always leave visible scars. Sometimes it hides beneath ordinary ground, influencing the future quietly. As Europe enters the high medieval period, new dangers rise. Invasions come from the north and east. Internal wars tear at fragile unity. Disease reshapes populations. In these moments of uncertainty, the memory of Tours is reshaped again. It becomes less about who fought whom, and more about endurance itself. It is no longer a battle between faiths in the popular imagination. It is a lesson about standing firm when movement seems impossible. The irony is that the most important truth of Tours is rarely spoken. It was not destiny that decided the outcome. It was patience. It was restraint. It was leaders choosing not to chase glory, and soldiers choosing not to flee. These are not dramatic qualities, but they are powerful ones. They do not make for easy legend, yet they shape history all the same. as scholars continue to debate and reinterpret, one fact remains unchanged. The battle created a pause. That pause allowed time for consolidation, for identity to form, for power to reorganize. Without it, the future would not have unfolded in quite the same way, even if the difference is subtle and difficult to measure. And as Europe stands on the edge of even greater transformations, of empires, crusades, and cultural rebirths, the shadow of Tours remains behind it, not as a single moment of salvation, but as a reminder that history often turns on quiet decisions made under pressure, when endurance outweighs ambition, and when holding a line can matter more than crossing one. That quiet influence continues forward, carried into a new age where the consequences of belief, memory, and power will grow far beyond the fields where this story began. By the time the investigation reached what newspapers were already calling its endless winter, the Black Dahlia case had begun to rot from the inside out, not because of a lack of suspects, but because there were simply too many, each one carrying a shadow just dark enough to be believable. Detectives were drowning in tips, letters, rumors, and confessions, many of them from people who seemed to crave proximity to the horror more than they feared punishment. Some wrote long, rambling letters describing fantasies of violence. Others calmly stated they were responsible and provided details that fell apart under scrutiny. The sheer volume of false leads began to erode morale within the lab. Officers worked double shifts, chasing names that led nowhere, knocking on doors that revealed nothing, and slowly realizing that the killer had achieved something far more devastating than murder. He had turned the investigation into chaos. One suspect, in particular, began to loom larger than the rest during this phase, not because the evidence was solid, but because his life fit too neatly into the narrative people wanted to believe. He was a doctor, well-educated, deeply troubled, and surrounded by whispers of sadism and obsession. His name circulated quietly at first, shared between detectives and prosecutors behind closed doors, before leaking into the press in half-formed accusations and suggestive language. Friends described him as brilliant but unstable, someone who spoke casually about dismemberment and control, who collected disturbing photographs, who seemed fascinated by Elizabeth Short-Long before her death. Yet every time investigators attempted to build a case, it slipped through their fingers. Alibis appeared. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Physical evidence failed to connect him definitively to the crime. Still, the suspicion lingered, sticky and unresolved, poisoning every discussion of progress. As months passed, the tone of the investigation shifted from urgency to desperation. The public, once gripped by fear, began to grow impatient and angry. Editorials accused the police of incompetence. Politicians demanded results. Rumors spread that the department was protecting someone powerful, or worse, that the killer was one of their own. Inside the force, relationships fractured under the pressure. Detectives argued over theories, each convinced their interpretation was the correct one, unwilling to let go even when the evidence refused to cooperate. Files grew thicker, not with answers, but with contradictions. Elizabeth Short's life was dissected endlessly, her relationships scrutinized, her movements mapped again and again, as if repetition alone might suddenly reveal what logic could not. Meanwhile, Los Angeles continued to glamorize itself, the city of sunshine and opportunity determined to move on, even as the case remained unsolved. New scandals replaced old headlines. Hollywood produced fresh stars. Nightclubs filled. Laughter returned. And yet the ghost of the Black Dahlia lingered in alleyways and vacant lots, in the nervous glances of young women walking alone after dark. Elizabeth Short became less a person and more a symbol, her real voice drowned out by speculation and myth. Each retelling of her story pushed her further away from who she actually was, transforming her into a canvas onto which the city projected its fears, its guilt, and its fascination with violence. By the end of this phase, the investigation had reached a strange, unsettling stalemate. There was no official closure, no arrest to satisfy the public, no confession that could be trusted. Instead, there was only an expanding silence, broken occasionally by new claims or rediscovered suspects, none of them strong enough to end the nightmare. Detectives who had once sworn they would never rest until justice was served began to retire, taking their theories with them. Files were archived, then reopened, then archived again, and somewhere within those yellowing pages, the truth remained buried, not because it was unreachable, but because it was lost amid too much noise, too many voices, and a city that could not decide whether it wanted answers or simply another legend to whisper about in the dark. Even as the months bled into years, the memory of Elizabeth Short's murder refused to fade. Los Angeles, a city always in motion, kept building, kept expanding. But her story lingered like smoke in an abandoned room, intangible, unavoidable, and persistent. Each year brought a new generation of detectives, journalists, and amateur sleuths who believed that perhaps, finally, the truth could be uncovered. They pored over the same yellowed files, examined the same photographs, re-interviewed the same witnesses. And yet, each effort seemed only to deepen the mystery. Every lead that seemed promising dissolved under scrutiny. Every confession proved hollow, and the killer, whoever he was, remained a ghost, present in absence, a shadow stitched into the fabric of the city itself. In the department, frustration had turned into obsession. A new wave of investigators took up the case with single-minded intensity. They chased patterns in Elizabeth's life, tracing every relationship, every interaction, every rumor. They examined men who had brushed against her world, men whose motives ranged from affection to obsession, from envy to violence. Names circulated in hushed tones during meetings. Each suspect carried a weight that seemed both tangible and absurd. Some were prominent figures in society, others invisible shadows, their existence only hinted at through fleeting mentions in interviews. Every thread pulled seemed to tangle into another, until the web became impossible to navigate. Yet, even as the investigation spun in circles, the city's fascination grew. The Black Dahlia became more than a murder. She became an idea, a dark allure that captured the imagination. Writers, journalists, and even casual storytellers transformed her into a symbol. The beautiful, doomed woman at the heart of Lowe's Angels. Glamorous but dangerous facade. Each retelling twisted her life into archetype, flattening the complexity of Elizabeth's reality into something easily digested and endlessly discussed. She became the reflection of a city that both celebrated life and obsessed over its hidden horrors. Public fascination brought pressure, and pressure brought mistakes. Some detectives, eager for recognition or haunted by failure, made claims that could not be substantiated. Letters arrived daily, many from people confessing responsibility, some from the mentally unstable, others seeking fame or attention. Each claim had to be treated seriously, at least initially. And yet, every single one unraveled under investigation. Some provided intricate details that seemed credible at first glance, only for critical errors to expose deception. Others were absurd or fantastical, reading like horror fiction rather than fact. The endless influx of false leads slowed progress, consuming hours, days, and months of attention without bringing closure. Meanwhile, whispers of corruption and conspiracy began to circulate. Rumors suggested that someone within the police department or the press might be shielding the killer, either out of fear, power, or personal interest, though evidence of such interference was tenuous. The stories gained traction. Every new scandal, every whispered suggestion of cover-up, added layers to the mythos surrounding the case. Elizabeth Short's murder was no longer just a criminal investigation. It became a lens through which the city examined itself, its fears, its obsessions, and its vulnerabilities. In homes and bars, in offices and classrooms, the story spread. Young women walked more cautiously through darkened streets. Parents cautioned their daughters with hushed urgency, invoking the name of Elizabeth as both warning and omen. The city itself seemed to pulse with the energy of the unsolved, its streets alive with the tension of unresolved violence. Every unsolved crime afterward was inevitably compared to the Black Dahlia case, the yardstick of horror, the benchmark for both failure and obsession. Yet, for all the attention, the truth remained just out of reach. Every lead chased into shadows ended with frustration. Every suspect interrogated seemed to slip through the grasp of certainty. And within the police department, among those who had dedicated themselves to justice, a quiet despair settled in. They understood that closure was not simply a matter of persistence. It required a combination of timing, luck, evidence, and human honesty that had so far proven elusive. Even decades later, investigators and writers alike would return to the case, drawn to its magnetic, unsolvable center. The files, photographs, and testimonies were meticulously studied and restudied. Patterns were proposed and discarded. The city changed around it, the neon lights, the freeways, the towers. But the fascination remained, tethered to the idea that somewhere, hidden in the shadows of Lowe's angels, lay a truth that refused to reveal itself. And in that refusal, the Black Dahlia continued to haunt, not just as a victim, but as a reminder of the city's own mysteries and the enduring power of a story that refuses to end. The investigation had reached a plateau, a long and silent stasis, yet the tension was far from over. For in the unsolved, the imagination flourishes, and for the Black Dahlia, whose life was cut so brutally short, the story had only begun to take on its immortal, chilling form, a narrative that would continue to twist, grow, and haunt, long after the investigators, who had first sought answers, had vanished. The shadow of the unsolved crime stretched outward, touching every corner of Lowe's angels and beyond, leaving everyone who encountered it with the same haunting question. Who did this, and why had the world allowed it to remain a mystery? And as new generations approached the case, some with hope, some with obsession, the stage was quietly set for revelations, confessions, and theories that would challenge everything previously believed, keeping the Black Dahlia alive in the collective imagination, where she would linger forever between life, death, and legend. Even as decades passed, the Black Dahlia case refused to settle into quiet memory. It became a shadow that stretched long across Lowe's angels, moving with the city as it expanded, its neon lights flickering against the darkness in ways that seemed almost intentional. Each new generation of residents heard whispers of her name. Each new reporter who arrived in the city felt compelled to dig, to write, to uncover, even though the trail had long gone cold. The case had transformed from a criminal investigation into a kind of cultural obsession, a story that the city told itself about its own hidden darkness. Within the Lapt, a new cadre of detectives inherited the files, many of them filled with meticulous notes, typed reports, and hand-scrawled observations from officers who had retired or died decades earlier. They approached the case with modern methods, Forensic science, fingerprint databases, psychological profiling. They reviewed photographs and autopsy reports with eyes sharpened by new technology, hoping that what had once been invisible might now reveal itself. But every clue seemed to resist clarity. The crime scene, now a faded memory, offered no new answers. Witnesses were gone. The trail had grown cold, thick with the dust of time. Yet obsession never dies easily. Writers continued to return to the story, spinning narratives that blurred fact and speculation. Some claimed intimate knowledge of Elizabeth Short's life, creating detailed portraits of her relationships, her hopes, and her fears. Others focused on the killer, painting him as a monstrous genius, a shadow lurking just beyond the reach of the law. Every book, every article, every documentary fed the legend further, turning Elizabeth into something simultaneously human and mythic, a young woman whose life ended too soon, but whose story would echo forever. Public fascination only intensified when alleged confessions emerged decades later. Some were genuine attempts by disturbed individuals to claim infamy. Others were hoaxes designed to attract attention or to toy with authorities. Each confession had to be scrutinized meticulously, for even a small thread of truth could potentially unlock decades of mystery. But more often than not, these claims collapsed under investigation. The details did not match. Timelines contradicted known facts, and the confessions were dismissed. And yet, each one reminded the world of the lingering uncertainty. The case was not finished, and perhaps it never would be. Lowe's Angels itself seemed complicit in keeping the story alive. The city changed, modernized, and expanded. But in the empty alleys, the long-abandoned lots, the quiet streets near the old Hollywood neighborhoods, the echoes of fear remained. People whispered about the Black Dahlia when walking alone at night. Teenagers dared each other to visit sites connected to her last known movements. Artists drew inspiration from her image. Photographers staged recreations. Filmmakers imagined endless interpretations. Elizabeth Short became a mirror reflecting the city's own anxieties, obsessions, and desires. Meanwhile, the investigation, although stagnant in terms of arrests, evolved in method. Forensic science, unavailable in the 1940s, now offered new possibilities. DNA testing, chemical analysis, and modern profiling allowed detectives to revisit evidence with fresh perspective. Old photographs were digitally enhanced. Margins of documents were examined for overlooked notes. Every small detail was scrutinized, as if the truth had been waiting patiently for technology to catch up. And still, the killer's identity remained elusive. Each breakthrough led to more questions than answers, deepening the sense that this was a case designed to frustrate human understanding. The myth and the reality intertwined in ways no one could fully separate. Elizabeth Short, once a real person with real fears and real dreams, became a symbol of vulnerability, of fascination with crime, of the dark allure of Lowe's Angels itself. Her life and death were endlessly reinterpreted. Photographs were circulated, not just as evidence, but as cultural artifacts. Writers and journalists debated endlessly about who she really was, what she wanted, and what the city owed her in memory and justice. Yet beneath the legend, the simple, tragic truth remained. A young woman had been brutally murdered, and her killer had never been caught. That fact, stark and undeniable, persisted beyond myth, beyond speculation, beyond fascination. And it was that truth, fragile and haunting, that continued to compel those who sought justice, understanding, or merely a glimpse into the darkness that had taken her from the world. Even now, decades after the murder, the Black Dahlia case stands as a reminder of how a single act of violence can ripple across time, shaping culture, memory, and imagination. It is not just a story of murder. It is a story of obsession, of the human need to find meaning in chaos, of the way cities carry their secrets for generations. And in every retelling, in every attempt to solve the unsolvable, Elizabeth Short's story remains alive, haunting the edges of history, where the line between truth and legend is forever blurred. And as the search for answers continues, both in archives and in imagination, the city holds its breath once more, waiting for the day when the shadow might finally be lifted, or when it will stretch even further into new stories, new generations, and new obsessions yet to come. Time moves relentlessly forward, and yet the Black Dahlia case remains suspended, as if caught in a moment that refuses to end. Decades have passed, yet the story is far from finished. The investigation, once urgent and chaotic, has become methodical, almost ritualistic. Every new researcher, journalist, or detective who approaches the case must contend not only with the original evidence, but with the accumulated weight of legend. Every photograph, every document, every scrawled note carries more than just information. It carries expectation, fear, and obsession. It is a puzzle that has grown larger over time, each attempt to solve it creating new questions instead of answers. In the archives of the Lapt, the files are treated almost like sacred relics. Years of painstaking work have gone into organizing them, cross-referencing names, timelines, and statements. Yet, even with the best minds and the clearest methodologies, clarity remains elusive. There are suspects whose connections seem compelling, yet their alibis hold. There are confessions that seem convincing, yet fall apart under scrutiny. There are photographs and letters that hint at truth, yet lead nowhere definitive. The past stubbornly refuses to give up its secrets. The cultural impact of the case continues to expand, reaching far beyond the boundaries of law enforcement. Writers of fiction draw inspiration from Elizabeth Short's story, blending fact and imagination to create new myths. Filmmakers stage chilling reenactments, their cameras lingering over empty streets and shadowed alleyways, trying to capture something that may no longer exist. Artists, photographers, and poets explore her life and death, searching for beauty within tragedy and turning her into a symbol that is both haunting and timeless. Even public fascination takes on a ritualistic quality. Every anniversary of her death, every mention of her name in newspapers or books, sparks renewed attention. Podcasts dissect every detail, from her last movements to every suspect ever considered. Online forums debate endlessly, comparing notes, theories, and interpretations. Elizabeth Short, once a young woman navigating the hopes and anxieties of life in Los Angeles, has become an eternal presence, hovering over the city in memory, imagination, and obsession. Despite the legend, the human tragedy remains at the center. It is easy to forget that Elizabeth was not simply a story, a myth, or a cultural symbol. She was a person alive, full of ambition, longing, and dreams, whose life was abruptly, violently taken. Her death shattered not only her world, but also the lives of those who knew her, and it left a wound in the city itself. In examining her life and her murder, the sheer human cost remains impossible to ignore, piercing through decades of myth-making and speculation. Modern investigators occasionally uncover small breakthroughs, moments when the past seems almost tangible. A new forensic method might suggest a lead worth pursuing. A previously overlooked document can spark discussion. Old witnesses, though few and fragile with age, may recall tiny details long buried. Yet every small advance only highlights the enormity of what remains unknown. The case is like a dark mirror, reflecting the relentless passage of time and the unchanging nature of human curiosity. As scholars and investigators continue to revisit the Black Dahlia case, the duality of its existence becomes clear. It is simultaneously a deeply personal tragedy and a cultural phenomenon. It exists in multiple realms at once: the factual, the imagined, and the mythologized. Elizabeth Short is at once a young woman, a victim, a cautionary tale, and an icon. Each retelling, each analysis shifts the story slightly, creating a narrative that is simultaneously static and endlessly fluid. Yet, despite all the attention, the most chilling aspect remains simple and immutable. The killer has never been caught. That absence is a presence of its own, shaping the contours of the case as profoundly as any evidence ever could. The unsolved nature of the crime amplifies its power, turning every theory, every suspect, every investigation into a reflection of society's fears, obsessions, and desires. transforms Los Angeles itself into a character, a sprawling city where light and darkness coexist, where glamour and horror intertwine, and where secrets are buried as deeply as its streets. And as the case continues to be studied, debated, and reimagined, it becomes clear that the story is far from over. Every new generation that confronts it does so with fresh eyes, fresh methods, and fresh questions. The Black Dahlia is no longer just a case from the past. She is a lens through which the present is examined, a ghost whose shadow stretches long into the future, reminding all who listen that some mysteries are never meant to be solved completely, and that in the space between truth and legend, the story and the fascination it inspires lives on forever. The stage is always set for the next attempt, the next theory, the next uncovering, because the case refuses closure, and the city, in its restless and endless growth, refuses to let go. Elizabeth Short is there still, a spectral presence hovering between the streets and the archives, demanding that the world remember not just her death, but the enduring mystery that it left behind. Decades into the aftermath, the Black Dahlia case became more than a criminal investigation. It became a mirror reflecting the obsessions, fears, and desires of a city that refused to forget. Los Angeles had grown into a sprawling metropolis, a city of glittering lights, star-studded streets, and endless promise. Yet beneath the glamour lurked shadows that no neon could illuminate. Elizabeth Short's murder was a wound that time could not heal, a dark seam stitched into the city's history that no amount of progress or development could erase. For investigators, the case evolved into a puzzle that defied traditional closure. New techniques, from fingerprint analysis to early DNA testing, offered glimmers of hope. But each breakthrough only deepened the mystery. Evidence that once seemed straightforward revealed inconsistencies upon re-examination. Suspects long dismissed resurfaced in new contexts, and confessions, when they appeared, often fell apart under scrutiny. It was as if the crime itself were designed to resist resolution, a labyrinth with no exit. And every attempt to solve it only emphasized the enormity of what had been lost. The cultural impact of the case only expanded with time. Elizabeth Short became a symbol of fragility and fascination. Her image reproduced in books, films, art, and documentaries. Writers portrayed her as the archetype of innocence destroyed. Filmmakers recreated her story with stylized horror, and artists captured her haunting gaze in countless interpretations. Yet behind every portrayal, there remained the immutable truth. She was a real woman alive once, full of ambition, dreams, and vulnerability, whose life was cut tragically short. That duality, the human and the mythic, gave the story an almost magnetic power, drawing people into its orbit even decades after her death. In the public imagination, The Black Dahlia became more than a victim. She became a cautionary tale, a warning, and a symbol of the darkness that can reside in the shadows of even the brightest cities. Her story fueled fear, fascination, and speculation. Young women whispered about her fate. Journalists speculated endlessly, and the general populace obsessed over the unanswered question: who did this, and why? That question, simple yet unanswerable, became the heartbeat of the legend, a pulse that kept her story alive through generations. For the Lapt, the case remained a haunting reminder of the limits of justice. Investigators dedicated years, even decades, to uncovering the truth, only to confront the stubborn reality that time had eroded nearly all direct evidence. Witnesses aged, memories faded, and physical traces vanished. Yet the drive to solve the case never truly died. Each new officer, historian, or amateur sleuth approached the files with hope, believing that the final piece of the puzzle might lie hidden among the thousands of pages, photographs, and letters collected over the years. And each time, the answer remained just out of reach, teasing and tormenting those who sought it. Meanwhile, Lowe's Angels itself seemed complicit in keeping the story alive. Streets changed, buildings rose and fell, yet the areas connected to Elizabeth Short's final days retained a quiet, eerie resonance. Empty lots, abandoned buildings, and shadowed alleyways became stages for imagination, where the mind filled in the gaps left by the missing truth. The city's growth and transformation only accentuated the story's haunting nature, as if the chaos of urban development mirrored the chaos left behind by her death. The legend of the Black Dahlia also illuminated the human need to find meaning in tragedy. People created theories, patterns, and explanations, sometimes contradictory, sometimes fantastical. Each new narrative was an attempt to impose order on the senseless, to give closure where reality offered none. Some believed the killer was a medical professional, others an obsessive neighbor, some a stranger who vanished into anonymity. The uncertainty became part of the story itself, a chilling reminder that not all questions have answers. Yet in the midst of myth and speculation, the core truth remained stark. Elizabeth Short was murdered. The violence done to her body, the life stolen, and the innocence shattered were real, undeniable, and profoundly human. That human tragedy, often obscured by legend, continued to anchor the story, giving weight to every retelling and demanding that she not be forgotten. And so, as Lowe's Angels moved into the later decades of the 20th century, the Black Dahlia case persisted as a living enigma. It was both history and legend, both crime and myth, both sorrow and fascination. It demanded attention, imagination, and reflection. It reminded every investigator, journalist, and observer that some mysteries, no matter how much time passes, never fully unravel. The city itself, vibrant and restless, carried the weight of that unresolved darkness, shaping the stories it told, the fears it nurtured, and the myths it created. And in the quiet spaces between streetlights and shadows, Elizabeth Short's story lingered, waiting, haunting, compelling. A reminder that some truths are never easily captured, and that some shadows never fully fade. The case was far from over. It remained alive in whispers, in theories, in the endless curiosity of those who refused to accept that some questions have no answers. And with every retelling, every analysis, every examination, the story of the Black Dahlia grew, not just as a crime, but as a mirror of the human fascination with darkness, with mystery, and with the haunting echo of a life gone too soon. By the time the world had rotated through decades, Elizabeth Short's murder had transcended its origin as a criminal case and had become something far larger, a legend, a cautionary tale, a mirror of a city and a culture that could not look away. Los Angeles, for all its glamour, for all its promise of stardom and opportunity, carried a shadow that refused to dissipate. And in that shadow lived the Black Dahlia. She had become a presence in the city's collective memory, a haunting that persisted long after the streets had moved on, long after the initial shock of her death had faded from the headlines. Each generation approached the story differently. In the years immediately following the murder, it was an urgent and terrifying reality, a wound in the very heart of the city. Families whispered warnings, young women walked cautiously at night, and journalists pursued every lead with an almost feverish intensity. As time passed, the urgency faded, but the fascination intensified. Writers, filmmakers, and artists drew inspiration from her story, each retelling reshaping the narrative slightly, blending fact and speculation, reality and myth. The image of Elizabeth Short, the haunting, wide-eyed figure of tragedy, became a symbol larger than life itself. The investigation, meanwhile, had become an institution of its own. Decades of police work, reinvestigation, and archival research revealed just how many avenues had been explored, how many leads had dissolved into nothing, and how many theories, plausible or not, had been considered. Forensic methods advanced, offering possibilities that were unimaginable in 1947. Yet the truth remained elusive. DNA testing, fingerprints, even newly analyzed photographs provided tantalizing glimpses of potential answers, but always just out of reach. The killer had vanished not only from the streets, but from certainty itself, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions. Even the most devoted investigators had to confront a sobering reality. The passage of time had done what fear and violence could not. Witnesses aged, memories faded, evidence deteriorated. What was once immediate and raw had become historical, layered with legend, distorted by memory and retelling. Yet, paradoxically, the impossibility of closure is what kept the story alive. Each unanswered question, each dead end, became another reason for the world to return, to speculate, to wonder. The Black Dahlia was never truly gone. She was preserved in the gap between reality and myth. Public fascination remained relentless. Every anniversary of her death sparked renewed discussion. Documentaries, podcasts, books, and articles continued to emerge, each attempting to solve what remained unsolvable, each attempting to peel back the layers of myth to find the human truth beneath. Yet, with every attempt, the story proved its own complexity. Elizabeth Short was a young woman with dreams, vulnerabilities, and a life full of ordinary hopes. And yet, she had become something extraordinary in the public imagination, an enduring symbol of mystery, of beauty and tragedy intertwined, of a crime that could never be fully explained. And so, in the streets, in the archives, in the imaginations of all who encountered her story, the Black Dahlia persisted. The city itself seemed to breathe her presence. Shadows in alleys, empty lots near Hollywood, the whisper of her name in conversation, all served as reminders that some crimes, though they may have occurred decades ago, remain ever present in the collective consciousness. She was a ghost, not only in the literal sense, but in the cultural and psychological sense, a marker of the darkness that exists even in places bathed in light. Ultimately, the Black Dahlia case endures because it reflects a human truth, that some mysteries are not meant to be fully solved. They exist in the tension between fear and curiosity, reality and imagination, life and death. Elizabeth Short's story reminds us that the past has a hold on the present, that the echoes of violence reverberate across generations, and that the search for meaning in tragedy is a defining part of our collective experience. Even now, as new investigators, journalists, and curious minds approach the case, the story continues to shift, to grow, to haunt. Each retelling carries fragments of truth, but also layers of myth and speculation. And in that space between certainty and mystery, the Black Dahlia lives on, forever young, forever tragic, forever compelling. Her murder may never be fully solved. Her killer may never be known. Yet her presence endures, casting a shadow that refuses to be erased. A shadow that will linger in Lowe's angels and in the minds of those who encounter her story for all time. In the end, the Black Dahlia is not just a case. She is a reflection of obsession, of the limits of justice, of the allure of mystery, and of the fragile humanity caught between life and legend. And as long as people continue to ask who she was, what happened, and why it was allowed to remain a mystery, Elizabeth Short will remain alive, haunting, hauntingly beautiful, and eternally unresolved.